buck.
We very much need you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks earlier for calling my name out. It seems to always happen when I'm in the audience.
You were sitting there with some wire in your ear, and I assumed you were listening to music, and I wanted to test that theory out.
Well, no, actually, I thought I was at a self-help seminar, and I was waiting for Tony Robbins to speak, but you woke me up out of the trance when you called my name, so I do appreciate that. And lo and behold, you're talking about habitat restoration, so I do have a couple of thoughts for you since we're in the business of that. First, a few preface things, then a couple of things that I think the Stewardship Council can really help us on. One, there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of coordination. The report earlier, I think, is a bit dated now already because a whole lot of things have been happening in terms of coordination, and Campbell's group is really helping us a lot in that regard. These projects are extraordinarily difficult. I know you know that. The Dutch slough example is really the rule, not the exception at all. 10 years is kind of the common denominator of numbers for some of these projects in terms of getting them going. I've been doing this kind of work for 30 plus years, restoration projects, port projects, pipelines, reservoirs. These are the hardest things I've ever done in terms of building projects in this state. They're super complex on many levels, scientifically, physically, culturally, economically, geographically, institutionally. We don't get a pass on permits just because these are kind of green projects. Our permit process is as nasty as anything out there. It takes just as long, just as many permits. We are working in a willing seller environment, and that creates speculation because lots of folks are looking at these restoration area maps and other things going, I think I know where some great sites are. I'll go buy that, triple my money or quadruple my money, sell it to some government entity that has to restore it. And we've seen this a number of times already. We've got speculators holding land thinking they're worth now. They bought it for 3,000 acres. They think they now can sell it for 20,000. Well, it's not worth that until you've actually invested that money in it. So there's a lot of sites that are now tied up because of this kind of willing seller speculation environment. So we've all got to send a message out there that there's one buyer in the system, and it's us. And all the agencies are really working together on that. And our constraint as public agencies is appraised value. So we've got to work with that and dampen some of that down so that we can actually get some of this done in the right way in a willing seller environment. Because if we can't, we still have federal requirements to do this. And that would be a problem if we have to resort to things other than willing seller. It's going to take many players to do this. There are a lot of them in there already, and there's at least 3 models for doing this, and we're really only using 2 at this point. There's the agency model, like my agency, like DWR, go out, get the land, build the project, do the permits, do everything, hire the contractors, build it. There's a public-private partnership model. We're doing a project like that with Westervelt, a private consultant that actually went out and bought the land, and we're buying it out from under them and working with them to do the development. TNC and DWR is another kind of public-private partnership model, and we're actually involved in that project as well at McCormick Williamson. There's a third model that we haven't tried yet and one that we might want to be thinking about, and that's a service delivery model where we basically put out an RFP under certain conditions to the private sector and say, we want to build X amount of habitat acres in these kind of conditions, in these kind of places, and we ask you to sort of give us a proposal on doing that. What's the unit cost? Competition, I think, is good. We ought to be thinking about implementing that third service delivery model. Now to my suggestions and how you can help. The expert panel mode of reviewing habitat projects is getting kind of a good life of its own. It's not really terribly structured yet. We've done it kind of ad hoc. The ones for Prospect Island worked particularly well. We stole them and used it for our project. Worked pretty well. But I think the council could really be, and the Delta Science Group could really be a help in the sense that they could put together sort of the standing expert panel of Delta expert folks that would basically review projects going in terms of we buy a site or even reviewing a site perhaps beforehand, that there's a problem with confidentiality there. But say we have a site now that we've purchased and we go and say, we think it's good for this and we could do thus and such. Getting them early involved in terms of helping with thinking through design issues that we then study, and then we bring back at a certain point a fully fleshed out or a modestly fleshed out design to have them to resonate again really helps the regulators and the permit folks get behind what you ultimately design. So the Stewardship Council could could help us with maybe putting together a standing group that has the resident experts on delta hydrology, geomorphology, sediment, aquatic and tidal ecosystem ecology, invasive species biology, coastal and marine engineering, and then where need be on specific individual projects, bring in an expert that taps an expertise we need for a specific project. Rather than us having kind of this ad hoc approach we do now, we grab the folks that are sort of available based upon their expertise and the time. That would give us some continuity and some consistency and build some institutional memory on these projects that I think would be very helpful. So I want to throw that out there. This came up at a meeting yesterday with the agency folks. And
Suggestion or request, if you have any kind of description of those elements that you'd want us to think about, if you zip it to us as an email. The other consideration, if you think it's a good idea to put together kind of an ongoing collection of experts who are available for consultation, that really limits our ability to get people under the notion that most peer review panels are not compensated for their work. And if you can help us think through that, because that's, the more we demand of people who don't get paid, the fewer people we get.
Yeah, I think these would be folks that would have to be, you're not going to need them full time. You're going to need maybe 100 hours a year. But, Chris is really a great guy for this, and he I think could take this and run with it with the rest of those folks that, we see each other all the time. But I think Chris will get this right away, and I think it'd be a great role for the council to do. But I'm certainly happy to help. Second major point, it's become evident to me that the regulatory review process on these projects is not allowing for a screening and an integrated vision of how restoration is being done in the Delta, and particularly in the Ola Bypass. Just north of our project, there's a project now being built that just got permits that is a design plopped right out of the Midwest for a duck club. It has really no place in the bypass. Now, it's not necessarily a bad project, but it does not fit at all with the historical ecology of the project. How that got through the permit system blows me away. I cannot fathom how that happened. But it's you look at their project and our project, and they're not. Ours will coexist with it, and we'll get runoff from them. And I'm not trying to trash the project. It's the process that how did that get proposed and built in the bypass when we have such a different vision ecologically of what we're trying to do there? So that's something I think that needs to be looked at. And that was in our CS funding that funded that project. So it was federal government funding that drove something that's totally inappropriate in the system, totally outside what we're trying to do with the ecosystem restoration plan. It was quite stunning to me. So there's something I think the council, it's a coordination function, right? You guys could really help, I think, improve that.
But on that point, think of how we can try to provide a larger perspective on nearby, adjacent, potentially connected property without having the different Byron Buck show up to demand that we stop interfering with the project by raising tangential and unrelated issues.
Well, but your issues are not tangential and unrelated.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think you all need to figure out how you're inserting yourself in the permit process so that the council is getting an early loop on these, and the inappropriate ones don't get very far down the line, because clearly the current regulatory system totally dropped the ball in this one. Final point. I want to draw the link between ecosystem restoration and your earlier panel on drought and water supply reliability. They are totally linked. It's kind of the water version of The Right Stuff, the movie. No bucks, Rogers. If we don't have a reliable system, particularly on the export side, which is where all the money's coming from for these projects, we're not going to have any of them. We've got to find a way to bridge the gap in the next 10 years, dealing with some of the things Jason said in terms of regulatory analysis on some of these measures that are costing a lot of water, probably not providing much in the way of ecological benefit, so that we have a certain level of reliability that actually keeps money in the system before we see districts and major regions go bankrupt. And they're not going to produce any revenue because they have no water to sell, and then there's no money coming into the state and federal systems to then fund these projects. So there is a very distinct linkage between the water supply reliability goal, money, and ecosystem restoration. So with that, I will say thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Buck.